Hello, everyone. We are on the air. Welcome to Codementor Office Hours for today. My name is Mark, and today we have another excellent session build for you guys. Today we're focusing on the Ionic technology. We have a couple guys that have a lot of experience with Ionic, and I want to say up front a thank you to anyone that stepped out of the session to join the other room. It's one of the flaws of Google Hangouts, but thank you for your flexibility. If it's your first time joining an office hour session with us, usually what we do is we're going to go through a presentation on a specific technology, and then this entire time feel free to use the group chat, or if you're in the other room, the Q&A app, and I'll be sort of collecting questions the whole time, and we'll hit as many as we can towards the end. But without further ado, we have today Perry Govier as well as Mike Hartington, and Perry is a senior developer of the Ionic Framework with 7 years of experience in Minneapolis digital agencies. He was first exposed to Ionic as a developer building Ionic apps for clients. He works over at Driftly with previous experience with a number of companies including MTS Systems, ImageWorks Marketing, and SpiderTrap. He studied at Metropolitan State University, earned a BA in Commercial Multimedia, and today Perry and Mike are joining us to give us an introduction on the Ionic Framework and answer your questions. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow, that's a awesome summary. It's kind of, oh yeah, that did happen. All right, so what I think we want to do here is, first off, can everyone hear me okay? I guess.
Hey, you sound great.
Okay, cool. So what I will probably start with is just do a little bit of a review for the people that are unfamiliar with Ionic, kind of explain what it is, where it fits in the marketplace, where, why, and when you should use it. And then we'll do kind of feeling out time, we'll probably do like a quick example. And then we're going to go in and take some Q&A time. All right, so let me share my screen here. I'll just share the whole thing. All right. So, Ionic. Yeah, I already had an excellent introduction, but so as you mentioned, I am a framework developer of Ionic. I work at Driftyco, a startup in Madison, which kind of is what builds Ionic, or the team that builds Ionic. Mike is a remote worker. We have a couple remote workers. Mike is out in Rhode Island.
Wonderful Rhode Island.
And so to start off, we're going to just go through kind of a review of what is a hybrid app, and then over Ionic and larger picture what it is, and then go into some specific examples, and then talk about the CLI and do some demos. So you start off, you want a native app. I wish I was able to see you guys and that at the same time. All right, anyway. So if you want a native app, so the first thing you're going to probably do is that means you're going to develop in Objective-C or Swift if you're an iOS, or Java and Android. And those are great languages, but there are some downsides to it. So you have to be good in both platforms. They're not small, easy to learn languages. You have if you say you build an iOS app and you're loving it, you're really digging it, and you get it on the App Store and it's great, and then you want to work on an Android version. Awesome, but you have to start over from scratch. All the code that you used, you can't use it again. You can reuse some individual, like maybe your image assets you can reuse, but that's about it. The development, those are Objective-C and Java are lower level languages. While very powerful, they take a lot longer to develop in. And that whole all those combine to have diminishing returns. The more platforms that you have, the more that you have to invest increasingly large amounts of time. There's no scales of efficiency the more platforms you distribute to. So, is there a better way? There is. Well, so with Apache Cordova is a project, is an open source project which allows you to take essentially web apps and package them up as apps that live on an end device. So all the HTML and the CSS, it's not a web view in the sense that it's calling out to a server somewhere. All those assets are packaged on the device and distributed when you download it through the App Store. Where Cordova really shines then is it also gives you the ability to access lower level functionality that you can't normally access, or you can execute native code through their plugin system. So if you want to access the file system, your web browser can't normally access the file system. But using those Cordova plugins, you're able to get access to file system. You can do like better encryption. You can cameras. There's actually, if you check out NG Cordova, there's tons and tons of plugins available. And then nice advantage of that is that if you develop it once, you can work on that code works on multiple platforms. You don't have to reinvent it. But so there is a bit of a stigma, or at least there was, against HTML5. This is in internet terms is pretty old by now, but back in the day, Facebook had an app that relied pretty heavily on HTML5, and it was awful. And Zuckerberg actually went out and they backpedaled quite a bit from that approach, and he was very forward saying that they bet too much on HTML5. But a couple questions for that is: are you Facebook? Do you have this massive budget where you can build, and you have an army of native developers and of Android developers and Swift developers? And does that billion-dollar revenue model depend on that app? If you have all those pieces available to you, then go for it. I mean, why not? Most people aren't in that situation. And the biggest problem that hybrid apps have is the stigma that they're slow. And that Facebook app, that when Facebook said that HTML5 was a problem, that app was slow. If you guys have seen like a jQuery mobile app or some of those, like some other approaches with HTML frameworks, like when you click a button, you sit there and you're like, oh, okay, now it's moving. The whole experience just feels webby, and it doesn't feel like a native app. And it just diminishes the entire performance. And the people that you're building these apps for will feel disenfranchised, like they kind of got gypped a little bit. But that is not the case anymore. So there's a couple things that have changed since Zuckerberg said that. First off, the iPhone, the hardware itself has significantly improved. So the first iPhone came out, it was actually, that's not entirely accurate. The processor was 620 megahertz, but they actually downclocked it, or underclocked it, down to like 400 megahertz, and had almost nothing for RAM. Now we're sitting with quite a bit more memory. Modern devices are substantially more powerful, about roughly 9 to 10 times more so, which is a huge improvement. But it's less about the hardware and more so about the actual technologies that are using. So all these phones come with browsers on them that Cordova uses to deliver your app, and they're all pretty good, but they're getting substantially better. So, like if you look at the adoption rates of just these browsers, you have iOS 8 is already over 80% of the market has iOS 8, and iOS 7 is in terms of like building web apps and what web technologies it supports well, Things like request animation frame or CSS transitions. iOS 8 or iOS 7 was pretty good. So then when you look at Android's a bit of a different story. So they do have substantially slower uptake in adopting new platforms, but with Jelly Bean, the red dots there, even that is pretty good. Back when HTML5 kind of got a bad rap, Gingerbread was a lot more popular, and it was on the majority of devices, or even older versions of Android, and those were awful. They were really terrible. What's really exciting now is with KitKat, you have Chrome in the browser itself, and so you get some pretty substantial performance benefits from that. And even more exciting is now with Lollipop, you have an automatically updating version of Chrome. So it's what we call an evergreen browser. So that's as you can see, the yellow or yellowish orange there. The Lollipop's just starting to work its way into the markets, but we're very excited about that. When you're going ahead to build your app, if you're in Xcode and you're starting a new iOS app, you have, and you go to, I want to start new tabs app. You get, right off the bat, as soon as you name your app and hit start, you've got all these components that are ready and available for you to just drag into your app. All the gesture logic, navigation, and how to navigate between pages, all that is built for you. If you're building a web or like a Cordova app, Cordova is great, but when you start building that app, you start off with a blank HTML file that you can add stuff to. There's really no like library of assets or some sort of an ecosystem that gives you all those components that make a good quality app. And you can find a lot of those components piecemeal. There's tons of little plugins out there if you want like a calendar view or something. You can get a really great calendar view thing, but then you got to mix that in with your list view thing or something. And mixing and matching all these components, they don't always work well together. And you get kind of this Frankenstein of an app. There's also a lot of tips and tricks to building apps that are performant, and it's not as simple as just building a website. And getting those hybrid apps to be performant and work well is difficult, is tricky if you're building it out yourself. But we don't think you should have to. So that's where Ionic comes into play. Is we aim to be the native, what the Cocoa Touch is to iOS developers. We aim to be for hybrid developers. So by starting a new Ionic project, you get all the tons of components and all the things that make a successful and performant app just by starting a new Ionic project. So if you're for those web developers, what you use, it's just HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. If you know those, if you're a normal web developer, you're gonna feel right at home. Like it's all gonna look very familiar. If you're, as a web developer, you've started up a new Android project, suddenly things are very different. That's not the case with this. We do use Angular.js. So Angular is when we first started Ionic, we were kind of planning on starting with Angular, and then we're going to support Ember, or then we're going to add support for Backbone. And we very quickly realized that Angular was special, and that process of building an app in Ionic using Angular felt right. It felt like the way that the app should be built. And it doesn't help that Ionic is insanely popular. So this is just for Google searches what framework is trending, and I think anyone familiar with Angular has seen this before, and just the degree to which Angular has just completely broken the mold compared to all the other frameworks. So what is Ionic actually, or kind of a low level is it's a bunch of Angular services and directives that you can use to build your app. So what that means is, like, for tabs, we create a new, using Angular's directive syntax, we create Ion tabs, which is just a new HTML element that you can put in your app, and suddenly you have tabs available to you, which is great. And so tons of those components, along with services like a pop-up. You call a pop-up service and you say pop-up show, and then you get a pop-up, and you don't have to build that out from scratch. We do, as far as that logical separation, we do model pretty closely off of the native SDKs. So things that are imperative that you say, like, for example, a pop-up, those are going to be services. Things like buttons and stuff are little visual elements are directives that we add. And so if you are a native developer, what we have seen is a lot of people who are maybe like an iOS developer, but they need to build an Android app and they don't really want to take the time to learn Java. They'll come in and they'll build an app with Ionic, and we hear quite often that they feel right at home. All the components, the logical separation of what is what's imperative, what's declarative, matches up very similarly. But probably the most important thing with Ionic is that it's fast. So there's lots of tricks that we can use that we use under the hood to really maximize performance. One of the first things that you learn doing hybrid development is that DOM hits are expensive. If you're doing tons of manipulation of your page, it's going to slow down. And so grouping those and doing those cleverly and efficiently to minimize the amount of subsequent DOM hits that you have really makes a difference. Another big common thing is if you're starting a new Cordova app from scratch, if you hit a button or something, it's going to wait for 300 milliseconds to see if that was a tap or a double tap. Because if it's a double tap on iOS, if you double tap on just a web page in Safari, that means that you're going to zoom in, and so it doesn't. So WebKit actually takes a second to listen for those, whether or not you're doing a click or a double tap to zoom in. And so it won't actually fire that click event until after it has decided, no, it's not a double tap, which substantially just kills performance and makes it feel slow and clunky. So we got rid of it. As far as for doing your visual styling and stuff, it's all CSS. We're not doing anything terribly fancy for the look and feel of things. One thing we do use is Sass. So if you're familiar with Sass, we use Sass to componentize and reuse mix-ins and stuff like that, and set up defaults for colors and stuff. So you can change, if you wanted to change the look or the branding of your app very, very quickly, you can just change a few Sass variables, and suddenly your entire look of your app has changed. You don't have to use it. You can use regular CSS if you want to, but we use it under the hood, and if you're comfortable with it and you want to use it, you can generally accomplish things much faster. But yeah, you're not tied in to use it. As far as for our icons, we do have over 700 MIT licensed icons that we call Ion icons, built by our amazing designer, Vince Berry. And we have actually seen these Ion icons out in the wild, not even associated with Ionic. They're MIT licensed. It's a great icon font. I highly recommend you check it out. And by starting a new Ionic project, these Ion icons are bundled into that project. So the full stack of what it is you have your Ionic app, the code that you write, which uses Ionic Components. And then Ionic itself uses Angular to do its directives. And you can then use Angular yourself if you're going to write your own services to communicate with some RESTful server somewhere, or whatever you're building. You write Angularjs code. And then all that sits on top of the web view, Cordova. So you're interacting with the DOM as you build your app. It's a web page if you're familiar with web development. But it does, through Cordova, give you access to those native SDKs where you can call stuff like camera plugin, get picture, and then it is going to fire off a camera window where it'll get you a picture. And Cordova allows for that. So you don't want to use something that's fly-by-night. So we're pretty proud of Ionic's adoption. It's been really fun to watch over the past year. So we're currently sitting at 15,000 GitHub stars. We're at like the 36th most popular GitHub repo, and consistently trending. Our CLI gets a lot of activity, but actually there's a lot. So the CLI numbers is actually somewhat misleading because a lot of people don't even or get the CLI or start their Ionic apps from completely different means. So those numbers are a little. They're actually, in reality, they're actually a fair amount higher than that. And oh yes, just to mention, we are in a release candidate now. So the state of development is we've gone through our alpha and our beta. We're for the time being done adding new features. We're working towards stabilization and getting towards that 1.0 release. So let's just do a quick overview of the components of what this actually looks like. So as a regular web developer, you are familiar with divs and lists and classes. And this it's similar to like the bootstrap approach. If you just use the right classes, things look awesome, and that's all there is to it. Where the directives come in is if you want to do something that has higher levels of interactivity. So like this is a list here, and just by using ion list and ion item, you can use ng-repeat through an array of items, but you get like the functionality to swipe list items over, or if you want to reorder things, you can do that. Just kind of neat. And so I want to get to you guys' questions, so I'm going to kind of go quickly through these things here. Collection repeat is so one thing. A good example for lists is when people build their app, their first hybrid app, and they have a really long list view. It starts to slow down. They're going to say, well, web technology, it's just not ready. It's too slow. If you were to, in an Objective-C or Java, not use the components that Android and iOS give you, like UI list view, and you're just to like build a list that you scroll through, that would be terribly. The performance on that would be awful as well. What UI list view gives you is as you scroll through things, you're scrolling through like the same 10, 20 items. And as soon as you scroll past something, it takes it off the top of the list and then adds it to the bottom and changes the content of it. So as far as memory is concerned, you're scrolling through the same 20, 30 items over and over and over again, and it's just the contents that are changing. And that's how you're able to get that performance. There's nothing magical about the language or programming in Objective-C that gives you that performance. And so that's what we've done with collection repeat. Is if you've got a long list, you can use collection repeat, and as you scroll through stuff, it'll take those items and replace their content. So you're only scrolling through a few dozen items at a time. All right. So then another trick thing is navigation. So getting those navigations to be nice and smooth and performant is nice. And it can be very tricky to do on your own. So we do the work for you. I just heard a ding. I'm going to check and make sure everything's going well. Okay. All right. Just to check in real quick. Is everyone following along well? Cool. All right. So with navigation, then, there's a lot of components that you might not think about. So for example, if you navigate in your tabs app, and you navigate in a few levels, and then you go to About tab, and you start going around there. If you go back to that main page, or go back to that other tab, you're going to be still several levels in. And so you have what this parallel histories that if you're coming from like a regular web development, you wouldn't even think about. And it doesn't really work with the way that the web works. When you hit the back button, you have one history that you're navigating through. So that complex navigation structure is something that we provide to you as well. Another kind of navigation type component is side menus. So here you go. Yes, see some of our form elements there. We've got the slide box, action sheets. I'm going to go through these a little quickly now. Popovers, which popovers is, I needed to test that before I got in there, before I started. Modals, so the modal window, and this is a good example. Like you've seen that is something that you would fire off. That's an imperative thing. So you call Ionic modal, and then you show it from there. So you can do like modal show. We've got pull to refresh. And so those are some of the components, but a larger thing that Ionic offers you is this ecosystem. So one of the tool that a lot of people like to use to get started is the Ionic Creator, and it's a really great way of just kind of scaffolding out your app. If you're familiar with like I don't know, like Dreamweaver or something like that, where you can just drag components onto some sort of a staging area and connect your pages. It's a great tool to use to do the scaffolding of your app. And if you really don't care if you're not concerned about customizing the look and design of things or a lot of the back-end logic of your app, it's possible to build a complete app just without writing a single line of code and just going through the creator and building out your app entirely through there. But in most cases, when you build an app in Creator, it's used as a starting tool that'll get you so that you just worry about the details of your design and plugging in with the back-end data that you have. It's a great way to get started. We also have the View app, so if you want to demo your app to people during the development process, say you've got a project manager who lives 1,000 miles away and you want to show them the app in development, you can upload your app using the CLI to Ionic IO and then view the app, or then that project manager then can look at the app in real time and see your development without having to go through any of the test flight or actually submitting the app or physically having it. Another great thing is if you want to see, for Windows developers, if you want to see how your app looks on an iPhone, this is a great way to do it as well. And so a lot of this magic in the development process happens through using the CLI. It's a pretty powerful CLI. So if you want to get started with an Ionic app, it's just Ionic. You just run Ionic start and then the name of your app, and it'll create the project for you, and you're good. You can start coding. And so stuff like deploying to your devices, or if you want to enable SaaS, or kind of a really handy thing for development is firing up a live reload server, so you can inspect things in Chrome and view the development, and then as soon as you change a line of code, it'll update that web view in real time, and you can actually even do live reload on devices, which is very neat. So, yeah, the process of getting started with Ionic is just you need to install Ionic and Cordova, and then you do Ionic start, and then the name of your app, and then optionally you have the side menu there. There's a couple of starters. So we have the big ones are the side menu, tabs, and then blank. There's a few more obscure ones, and we're going to be adding quite a few more. But if you don't specify that fourth option or that fourth word there, it's going to be it'll default to using the tabs starter. And then just go into that app, and you can fire off Ionic and see the app that you are building. So How are we doing on time?
We're good. You can keep going for a little while if you'd like.
Okay. So I can. Well, let's just fire off a demo, or fire off a demonstrate that.
Awesome.
All right. So do another one that's a little easier to see. All right. Is this big enough for you guys? Can you see this? I'll go to my desktop. Okay, good. So I'm gonna just do Ionic start my app, and so then that's gonna go out to GitHub and download the app and download that starter and create a new project. So, and also we update often, so you can see I'm a developer of Ionic and my CLI is already out of date by 2 versions. The CLI is constantly improved. It's great. But so that created on my desktop here this my app thing. So I'm gonna go into that directory and I'm gonna fire off Ionic serve. And there we have my app. And just by firing off those few commands, I've got an app. And so let's take a look at actually what that app is. If you're familiar with Cordova, this is all going to look very familiar. You've got a couple of directories. You've got hooks and plugins and your SAS folder. But the bulk of your time is going to be spent in this www, which is your app itself. So you've got an index file, which if you're familiar with web development, this should all look very familiar. If you then got your app, which kind of does your configuration, your bootstrapping. You've got your controllers, which is where you're kind of connecting your data sources with the view that's available to like your scope variables and stuff. So you're connecting your data sources with the information that's displayed. You've got your services, like those, like you can see here on this chats page. That information is getting this service is getting passed through a controller to a template. So let's take a look at this one. So, and I mentioned that this is a live reload server. So if I just make a change and save it, it's going to be reflected in real time. And so all this is fine and great. Like you built this cool app, you really dig it. But at this point, it's just a web app. Which is not really what we're trying to do. So I'm going to get on my server here, and I'm going to fire off, Ionic platform add iOS. And then, and I've just installed some updates, so hopefully this doesn't choke on me. Sweet. So if I had a phone connected, it would actually be running the app right on my phone. But because I don't have an iPhone connected to my computer right now, it fires up the emulator. And you can see that same app is now running on a device. And so that's a great example of just within a few minutes, I've built an app. And as far as customizing stuff, if you're a web developer, you're going to feel right at home. So I think at this point, we can probably open it up for some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time to do the demo. Yeah, guys, keep the questions coming. The ones that have come in so far have been really great. I'm going to start with some that came in a little bit earlier. Zaid, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, mentioned, what if I required swipe options for list on iOS, but in Android I required the same options in long press? Can you address that?
I'm not familiar with long press. Oh, like if you hold down, right? So there's if you check out our docs site, so if you just go to ionicframework.com/docs, it'll mention there's a section called utilities, and one of those utilities is platform. So you can do Ionic platform dot is iOS or is Android, and you can have some conditional logic. So depending on your situation, you can put that right in your controllers. Another thing, if you've got a substantial amount of differentiation between iOS and Android, and like even your markup, you can actually put that in your states. So if you go to like what's normally your app folder where you do your state provider and you define all the pages available, where it does the template URL, you can actually have that be a function that returns, that checks to see what is it Android or is it iOS, and have it return a completely different template. So
Awesome.
it's up to you depending on what is more appropriate.
Cool. He said that was a perfect answer to his question, so thank you.
Cool.
Stepan was curious if you could give some hints for using WebStorm with Ionic, if you have any thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we all use different tools. Mike's a big Vim guy. We have a lot of Sublime users. I actually prefer WebStorm. I actually just downloaded WebStorm 2. I'm excited to try it out, or WebStorm 10. I'm excited to try it out after this. One thing that if you're familiar with Tmux, I highly recommend, because WebStorm comes with that command line, or that terminal window at the footer that you can spin up. So I try not to use WebStorms like SAS or anything like that. And I fire up Tmux, which opens up a couple of different windows, or a couple of different terminal windows in one. And so then I'll fire up my Ionic Serve, and then I'll fire up Ionic Watch, and a couple of different commands that I can have running actively as I'm doing my development, which works great.
Gotcha. And a couple of different people are asking about Eclipse as well.
Yes, you can. I don't think anyone in the office here uses Eclipse, but plenty of people do.
There is an external plugin that you can use for Eclipse that people have been using and say works pretty well. I don't use Eclipse myself. I use Vim, so. But yeah, I'd highly suggest checking that out and investigating that.
Awesome. Sort of a broad question, but Dronko was curious. What are the best practices in using Ionic? Maybe we can zone in on something specific. So let's say maybe just getting started, making their first mobile app. What would you recommend as sort of like the main tenets to focus on getting started using the platform?
I think a big thing is to follow the examples. We've seen some apps where people wind up nesting things in a very weird way. So you have somebody put like a side menu within a tab, and then they'll have tabs inside the side menu that has a tab higher up, and they get these really weird, complicated apps. I would avoid doing that, or follow like our examples. Like I mentioned, we have a couple of like less talked about starters. We do have a navigation starter, which kind of shows how to do a more complicated navigation if like you want to have tabs and side menus going together. So I'd say there's a massive community, and so finding examples is probably the best place to start. And one kind of cool thing with the CLI is that you can take when you do the Ionic start, the name of your app, rather than saying which starter you want to use, you can also use a CodePen URL. So if you see like an example on CodePen that you really like, and you want to like start an app based on that, you can just do Ionic start my app, and then whatever that URL is, and it'll build an app of that code pen. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, to add to some of the best practices as well. There's a great guide out there by this guy John Papa on best practices for structuring your Angular app. And since Ionic is built on Angular, these concepts and ideas work the same way. Can work in the same way. So you can follow out how to structure. If you want to structure your app when you code it by feature, by controllers, services, and views, or what have you. His guide provides some really good insight and idea on how you would go about doing that.
Awesome.
Hey, Mike, I think your mic is getting kind of staticky or something. I don't know if you're able to hear that as well.
Yeah, it's a little scratchy. I mean I can hear it well enough, but there's a little bit of distortion in there. But, he's just rocking out louder than everyone else. I really like that initial best practice of don't start with a really weird project. So next question. So Stepan was curious about a couple things. If you could talk about unit and functional tests in Ionic, maybe specifically as they compare to AngularJS, and then if you could talk a little bit more about emulator too.
Sure. So Ionic itself is, we have tons of unit tests on the framework. I think we're up like 850 now, somewhere around there. And so we used just the regular Jasmine and Karma to do those unit tests, and we highly recommend you use those in your apps. Developing the framework, it's saved our butt a number of times, and I would strongly encourage you to use unit tests. But yeah, it's regular Angular unit testing.
Cool. Juarez, who is also in the room here, was curious, how can we contribute with documentation translation?
That is a great question. So we are improving our documentation, and especially our internationalization support. So if you want to send an email to katie@drifty.com or myself, Perry@drifty.com, I would I'd be very interested in talking about approaches or things that we can do for better internationalization. Oh, and a second ago, there was a second part to that question before with emulators. With iOS emulators, you just need Xcode and just use the regular emulator that Xcode ships with. Also, with the Android emulator is awful, and I wouldn't recommend using it. In alternative that I really like is called Genymotion. They have some free options available, and they work substantially better. So I'd recommend giving those a shot.
Cool. Can you guys hear me okay? It blacked out for me for a little while.
No, yeah, now I can. You did black out for a bit, but you're good now.
Sorry about that. Great. Well, next question. In addition to previous one, it's clear with unit tests, and what about functional tests for projects that are built with Ionic? Not exactly sure how that's different than the other one. We have another question.
Well, we do have I mean, I guess I'm not entirely sure what is meant by that or how it differentiates. In addition to doing just the regular unit tests that you can do, we do also have some end-to-end testing. Some of that is in-house, but I would recommend like Sauce Labs has a way of running more visual unit tests on their server and actually on devices. I'd recommend doing end-to-end testing through something like Sauce Labs, which is very handy.
Cool. Yassine, who's actually in the other room in the live broadcast, just sent in a question. How hard is it to integrate Ionic to an existing hybrid application that's already using AngularJS?
Not terribly. Well, I mean, It a lot depends on the app itself and the complexity of your app. But we have quite often, actually just last week, I took a website that was built in Angular and in just an afternoon ported over and made, and just by mostly changing just the templates and using the same controllers and services, I was able to copy and paste that website in as an Ionic app and just change the templates a little bit to look a little more mobile-y and use Ionic components, and it went very, very smooth.
Nice. So a couple questions that were emailed in. Everyone still feel free to throw in any live questions now, but I'll go to a few that were emailed in. This is a little bit of a loaded question, but are there any books on the Ionic framework? I think Perry might be affiliated with a book on the Ionic framework.
There are a few books, and I'm not sure which ones are out and which ones are coming out. I think there's 3. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Yes, there's one going right now on the early access that's Miami.
Your mic's like gone. It's just noise. Sorry.
It's gotten more distorted since before.
Sorry. But do you want to just type what you're saying, or draw it out and like?
Cool. I can read it aloud. This is all being recorded to YouTube as well, and it won't show the text. Maybe while Mike's writing that out, do you want to, Perry? Do you recommend to use Ionic with Firebase? Jonka just was curious.
Yeah, I love using Firebase. It's awesome, and that whole if those unfamiliar, Firebase, Angular's big thing is that it has two-way data binding, so that if you change an input, it automatically updates your scope variables, and so that seamless connection between your interface and your data models is awesome, and that is really where a good part of Angular's power lies. What Firebase offers, specifically to Angular apps, is what they call three-way data binding, which is where if I start typing in an input field, it not only updates my model or my data model, but that data model is synced with a remote server, so that as I'm typing something or as I'm making a change in real time, that'll update my database server, which is really cool. There's a couple of great examples of like chat apps. So if you're building like a Firebase chat app or an Ionic chat app using Firebase, it's great. For anything that requires that real-time data management or real-time data syncing between the apps, I highly recommend Firebase.
Sweet. Mike did write in. He recommended Manning has a book out, Ionic in Action, and then we've got a couple other people throwing in links. So some it's still in progress, but it is a good resource. So people should definitely check those out. I also heard that Perry was an editor on a full stack mobile app book. Is that true?
Yes. Yep.
Nice.
I can paste the. Well, if there's a way of sending out notes, I can send a link to it.
Sure. Yeah. I'll send out notes after this. So someone else emailed in an interesting question. How does the Ionic framework measure against other hybrid frameworks? So, I mean, what other products would you put in this category that people are probably looking at when they're comparing to Ionic, and how do you see differentiation?
Well, for most of them, I'd say performance is the big differentiator. Yeah, if you're familiar, like when Ionic first got started, jQuery Mobile was king, and jQuery Mobile is great, but they support like old Nokia brick phones, and building out a modern app that still has support for those platforms, you're sacrificing things, and you're sacrificing performance more than anything. So I think that's where Ionic definitely stands out from a lot of the more established players. There's a lot of new people coming on the scene, which is exciting and awesome. I think at this point we are still a lot more mature than some of the other offerings. There is also stuff like like React is kind of the new hotness out right now, and or like the virtual DOM approach, and those are also very cool. I think with like there's things like React Native. I think that's less of a competitor to Ionic and more something for like Titanium or something where you're. And I think it's going to have some of the same limitations where you can build like cool apps very quickly, but you're going to have some problems with customization. That you have to use what they offer you, and if you want to do anything beyond that, you're kind of stuck, or it's going to it's going to be pretty difficult. So I think we're in the kind of in a sweet spot of being performant and being also very closely married to the regular DOM approach to the web, where you can use any regular component that if you want to extend things or kind of roll your own or make some component in addition, you can.
Awesome. Angular 2.0 planning is now started. How will that affect the Ionic roadmap?
That is a popular question.
Mm-hmm.
There is Ionic 2 is actually we had a big kind of a summit. Was it last week or the week before? Where we actually mapped out all of Ionic 2, and we're gonna release Ionic 2 with Angular 2, and we're actually working with the Google team directly, meeting with them regularly to do that development in tandem, which is very exciting.
Awesome. So that will, I'm sure that will.
Stay tuned.
Well, well, on the staying tuned note, what do you recommend people? Where should they sort of follow Ionic's progress? Just the GitHub repo, or your guys' blogs, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, our blogs are great for the big things that happen in Ionic. We normally make a blog post about it. If you're trying to just keep a more detailed level of what's going on, what's new, we have very active forums. If you are more of a code grepper and you want to go in and actually look at the commits, everything we do is open source. And you can see what I've done today just by going to our GitHub repo and see our updates in real time.
Awesome. We'll include links to a bunch of those locations in our message after this. Juarez was just curious, any chance to extend and make my own SVG Spinner in Ionic 1.0?
Yes. You can add to it. It's not a beautiful interface right now, or it's not as seamless as we'd like it to be. But it is possible. We're going to be, I think we're going to be doing a blog post pretty soon about how to go and do that. But yeah, it's something that we'd like to improve upon. It is possible, but it's not as easy as we'd like it to be right now.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, and if anyone has any last questions to get in, we have a few minutes left. But otherwise, this entire presentation will be up on the Codementor YouTube channel, so if anyone needs sort of another pass through the demonstration or any of the explanation, we'll have that available. But otherwise, we can start to wrap up here. There's a number of Ionic certified experts on Codementor. If any of you guys ever have any difficulty with your own projects, you can definitely utilize Codementor for that. Shanka says, keep up the good work. But yeah, one last question did come in. In Angular for web, we can wrap code of React and other framework inside Angular directives. Can we do the same with Ionic as well?
Angular for web. I don't think that would work for. You could do the regular web React. You might have some collisions there, but it should work pretty much the same way. React Native, that would not work. It's a completely different approach.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Mike and Perry, thank you guys so much for taking the time and introducing everyone. I can see that outside this room we had a lot of viewers checking this session out. Like I said, this is all recorded, so we'll have a lot more people check it out, and we'll be broadcasting it. And we'll also do a content write-up about this. So if any of you guys sort of prefer to read a synopsis to really ingrain this stuff, we'll have that available too. But if there's nothing else, I'll say good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever in the world you find yourself today. And thank you guys so much. And check out, there's a bunch more great office hours coming up. You can go to codementor.io, and to the office hours link, we're in the middle of a big JavaScript framework series. So we're meeting with tons and tons of amazing people on all ends of the JavaScript world: Ember, Backbone, Angular, all that stuff. So with that, I'll say thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.